And good afternoon. Thank you for this kind introduction, Shashiji, and many congratulations to the Mysuru Literature Festival for celebrating its 10th anniversary with this edition. Of course, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you also for the invitation to be a part of this year's programming. Mysore has been an important center for textiles in the past, and it seems relevant, therefore, that an inclusion of a session on textiles has been conceived as part of the festival's programming. It is wonderful to see so many of you in the audience who I know are passionately interested in the subject, and I hope I'm able to finish my presentation on time so there can be perhaps the chance for some conversation. My illustrated presentation here will consider a time span of almost 500 years, introducing such visual and material themes which we see expressed in handmade and hand-patterned textiles in India over half a millennia. Visual representations of such textiles, however, go back longer, and we find their depictions in art over 2,000 years in the Indian subcontinent. In creating this arc, I based my narrative on that of an exhibition which I had the chance, and I should say privilege, to curate early last year at the prestigious National Museum in Delhi, which was initiated by the Delhi-based Devi Art Foundation, a not-for-profit organization founded in 2005 by the prominent art collectors Lekha and Anupam Podar. The images that you will see here are of textiles from the permanent collections of the two institutions. But before that, a short 5-minute video as a start would help us virtually walk through the exhibition. May we have the video, please? Proposed textiles from the collections of the two institutions. And the exhibition is what we normally approach as a survey exhibition. So it's a brief survey or overview of Indian textiles over half a millennium. These exhibitions become pedagogic because we have students, we have practitioners, some of whom have not encountered in person the kind of historical objects that you see in an exhibition like this. And because, of course, it's a very vast subject with a lot of diversity, we've chosen to present this overview over 10 groups, each of which looks at one enduring visual or material theme which recurs in Indian textiles over this 500-year period. But in doing so, it also represents themes which recur in architecture, in other forms of art in the Indian subcontinent as well. One of the things that you might see in the exhibition is that there are key transition pieces. So we continue with the floral and vegetal themes, and then we have their incorporation into architectural compositions. For 2,000 years, across and more, we've seen the representation of different kinds of birds and animals in art, architecture, all over the world. And we have a few examples of how the theme of the birds and animals gets expressed in historical and contemporary Indian textiles. So the earliest textile in the exhibition is from the 14th, 15th century. And we have contemporary pieces which were actually made as late as December 2024. So for instance, our reproductions or conventional historical designs from the Ottoman repertoire of complex brocading, but they have been made in the 21st century. We have an extraordinary example of an actual end panel of a Kodali Karupur sari, which has been reproduced in 2023. This is a historical example of a Paithani. And the theme of the Shikarga that you actually see here, the enduring theme, the royal hunt, is something which is quite rarely found. This is also another form of the Shikarga. This is a detail from a 16th century Akbar period carpet. And in this case, we also see a very interesting subversion of the theme. The designer actually replaces images of the hunted animals with motifs of endangered species of animals. So what this also shows, and many of the key pieces in the exhibition that you encounter, is no matter how complex or extraordinary or intricate a form of textile production or patterning in the country, it can still be accessed. There are skills and designer attitudes that are actually keeping them relevant and alive. The second part of the exhibition draws our attention to what we may refer to as material themes. So these are actually groups which have been dedicated to specific ways of patterning or creating cloth itself. The National Museum is a public institution. It gets a broad spectrum of visitors. So we wanted to provide a show that would be actually educational and instructive, kind of like an introduction to Indian textiles, as it were. The motifs, patterns, designs, aesthetics, and decorative elements that you will encounter in images which follow are not restricted to fabric and cloth, as I also spoke about in the film. We find them rendered in other forms of art: painting, sculpture, decorative objects made in various materials, architecture and the built environment, hand-painted murals and frescoes, carvings in wood and stone, ceramic, mosaic and tile work, furniture, as well as jewelry and precious ornaments. And what could be a better way to illustrate this idea than through the enduring motif of the mango or the ambi? Today, this motif has become widely known as the paisley. You will see it here repeated in the end panel or pallu of a fragment of a waist sash from Kashmir from the 18th century, hand-woven in pashmina, a variety of the finest goat hair, which has origins in the upper Himalayan region and has widely become known also in the West today as cashmere. Such shawls with paisley patterns from Kashmir were sought after by elite consumers across the Indian subcontinent, worn by royals, aristocrats, and members of wealthy mercantile communities. Outside of India, their biggest market is known to have been in France, where they became so coveted and in demand that they were at one point banned from entering the French market, as they were competing with locally produced textiles. Copies followed, and replicas of them started being made both in weaving centers in France as well as other parts of Europe, including the Scottish town of Paisley, where they started being produced on machines on a large scale. So a design of possibly Indian origin in the motifs of mango or the ambi acquired a global dimension. But this ambi or paisley, comprising of several smaller groups of flowering shrubs and plants, may have itself emerged as we know of today from motifs of such small buttas as we see here in a 17th century pashmina shawl, also from Kashmir. Such themes of small flowering shrubs and bushes are seen in pashmina textiles from Kashmir well into present times through the 19th century, when a highly naturalistic botanical style of them were reportedly woven for the aristocratic elites of Hyderabad, with fine outlines, layered coloring, with several shades and tones of different colors used. Such sophisticated renders of florals and vegetal patterns allude in their palette to Indo-Persian influences, as well as a European Western palette. This achkan, made for a Hyderabad noble from the 19th century, uses another kind of such botanical Kashmiri pashmina fabric. Here, the motif of a leaf with great variations in green against a contrasting blue base acquires an almost large monumental form. An 18th century embroidered panel for a tent or kanat, coverlet for furniture, or perhaps a carpet made for a private enclosure, shows us how the kind of woven patterns of flowers, shrubs, and plants that we have seen earlier in versions of the Kashmiri Pashmina textiles were also translated onto other forms of textile ornamentation. A rare 17th or 18th century fragment of a similar tent panel or kanat is created using complex velvet here. Its base originally would have been covered in metallic thread, only frayed elements of which survive today. A close look at one of its repeated patterns in this detail shows us how master weavers and designers in the past attempted to create lifelike versions of floral patterns, mimicking the quality of hand painting that we see in miniatures as well as murals and frescoes. Exploring velvet as a material theme further, we see here a 21st century reproduction of an Ottoman velvet created in the Asha workshop in Varanasi, which was established in the early 1990s by textile designer and scholar Rahul Jain to revive qualities of 17th century complex brocades, which were once woven for the Safavid Iranian, Ottoman Turkish, and Mughal Indian courts. As the only such known workshop, which produces draw-loom complex velvets in the world today by hand, the fact that such historical examples can be masterfully recreated in India today shows that skills that we see in extraordinary historical examples of Indian textiles can still be accessed and nurtured given the right environment, patronage, and support. In the previous example and this 21st century velvet, also from the Asha workshop, we begin to see how standalone forms of flowering shrubs and bushes were equally composed in complex geometrical patterns. Such formats of design are often referred to as jal, all-over surface designs, and include, along with stylized versions of the buta that we've seen earlier, those of meandering creepers, which are called bale. Versions of such buta, bale, and jal were also transformed into dynamic surfaces for garments, as we see here in metallic embroidery or zardozi on a base of a plain velvet silhouette from the 19th or early 20th century. Buta, bale, and jal also come together to create another enduring compositional feature in Indian art called charbagh, referring to designs for classic formal garments where we find carefully orchestrated geometrical divisions. This is a 19th century charbagh cotton coverlet or rumal, hand block printed with natural dyes. Each part of the charbagh, as you can see, is differently rendered, showing the remarkable attempt by the designers and block printers to break the monotony of a geometric design. In such examples of Indian art, we continuously see how the eye is never made to stop. The eye lingers when looking at a piece like this on the textile with almost no starting point or end. Here is another version of a charbagh, this time brocaded in Varanasi, with a central circular medallion and corner elements which are called konya. We return to the paisley with this 19th century fine cotton muslin jamdani from Bengal, the border of which also has an unusual motif of a bird. I'm sorry, some of the slides are getting cut at the bottom, but you can see the line of paisleys. This brings us to another enduring theme in Indian textiles, and indeed in Indian art and architecture, of animals and birds. One of the ways in which such fauna has been expressed is in the theme of the shikarga, or the royal hunt, of which we see an elaborate historical example as a woven fragment, possibly the end panel or palla, of a shawl or sari created either in the handloom center of Chanderi, which is in Madhya Pradesh today, or Paitan in Maharashtra. Featured, as you can see here, are parrots, peacocks, deer, and tigers, among other floral and vegetal decorative elements. The theme of the shikarga continues with this Jamdani and chintz panel created in 2024 by the Chennai-based Aksh Studio. In another version of the shikarga, we see details from a contemporary textile panel woven at the Asha workshop mentioned before. We have seen its contemporary velvets, and here the designer transforms the idea of the shikarga from that depicting hunted animals to one which celebrates species of endangered birds. This shows us that the enduring themes that we speak about are also constantly challenged for their conventional associations and consistently subverted through creativity. Continuing with the theme of birds, we see intricately hand-painted versions of them here in this contemporary cotton and natural dye textile artwork by Kolkata-based Kalamkari artist Ajit Das. The coexistence of birds, animals with humans becomes another theme, which Indian art has continuously returned to, showing us the codependency between us. In Indian textiles, these are perhaps expressed at their most evocative versions in Pichwai, cloth paintings where themes from the life of the Hindu god Krishna takes center stage. Usually, in such Pichwai, Krishna himself is depicted, but in this an iconic representation, his presence is evoked through the central image of this kadam tree, surrounded by gopis, and I'm sorry you can't see, but there are cows below, which indicate to his identity as a cow herder. A subtle jasmine creeper, as you can see along, sort of circling the central tree, crawls around the trunk of the tree, symbolically showing his presence. The Pichwai also shows us the way in which textiles have played an important role in sacred spaces and in faith-based rituals, practices, and ceremonies. Pichwai are typically associated with schools of cloth painting in Rajasthan. This Pichwai, however, represents a school which is believed to have been active in the Deccan. This Deccani Pichwai then also takes us to the depiction of trees in Indian textiles, markers of prosperity, laden with ripe fruit, blossoming flowers, and chirping birds, if you can see some which are indicated in red along with the tree leaves, which over centuries has become immortalized as a theme of the tree of life. Pichwai are revered by Krishna devotees of the Vaishnava Vallabha Sampradaya sect, and Gujarat emerged as a center of embroidered Pichwai, as we see here in this rare embroidered Pichwai from the 18th or 19th century. Over a base of fine silk satin is embroidered this extraordinary, almost lifelike, image of Krishna in the chain stitch called mochi, which is associated historically with Bhuj, Kutch, the region of Gujarat. The theme of complex scenes in Indian textiles for sacred purposes is equally reflected in such hand-painted on-cloth landscapes, which have meaning for the Jain community. These are called pattas, and in this detail of a large example measuring almost 7 to 8 feet in height, we see literally a map depicting the pilgrimage site of the Shatrunjay Hill in Palitana in Gujarat, which is revered, as all of you may know, by the Jains. It is hand-painted using natural pigments dated to the 19th century and further represents what is often referred to as an Indic palette of vivid colors, primary blues, yellows, and reds, as distinct from the pastel Indo-Persian and European palettes that we have encountered before. This contemporary textile, a large screen and block printed cotton panel, shows us another enduring theme in Indian art, that of 9 planets or the Navagraha. In historical textiles, the theme is evoked in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, among others. And here we see a powerful abstract contemporary representation. Also fairly large, measuring about 7 feet by 7 feet. And speaking of the 9 planets, how can one not turn to the sun itself as an all-pervasive, ever-present source of life? The Surya is depicted here through its rays, with the central medallion bringing in elements from a watch's dial as a contemporary depiction of time. This exquisite textile panel was designed in the early 2000s by textile designer Charu Vadva, and its surface is appliqued with metal, gold, silver, and copper strips called badla, using the Lucknow-based Kamdani form of embellishment, which is also popularly called mukesh. Large geometrical patterns, such as the bold circles that we have encountered in the last 2 textiles, become another enduring graphic theme, which we see in other genres of Indian textiles. This vivid Bandhani Odhani from Kutch in Gujarat takes us to a tradition of tie and dye which has today largely become associated with Western India, Gujarat and Rajasthan, but which may well have been practiced in other parts of India as well. In fact, the earliest representations of these kinds of dot-like Bandhani motifs we see about 2,000 years back, early centuries of AD in the frescoes and murals at Ajanta. And of course, we know that Bandhani was also practiced in Madurai, called the Chungadi. The small dot of the traditional tie and dye Bandhani acquired a monumental scale in this contemporary interpretation by Kutch-based master artisan Aziz Khatri, where the possibility of the smallest to the largest dot possible in such tie and dye is explored. The singular exploration of indigo here further builds up another theme that we've seen earlier, the enduring charm of blue and its various symbolic associations in Indian art. Of course, in the Deccan, we have the almost black, dark blue Chandrakali. We have the Paithani that also use dark shades of indigo. And in East and North India, we have the Neelambari Jamdani from Bengal as well as Varanasi. From Bandhani, we now move to Ikat, another form of tie and dye, where the yarns are patterned using the tie and dye technique before the textile is woven itself. In many parts of India, this is called bandha, with the patola textiles made in Patan in Gujarat being among its most famed version. The unusual Patan patola that we see here is a rumal or coverlet from the 19th century. Usually the Patan patola tradition has been involved in the weaving of saris, as we saw Shubha wearing this morning. Taking the idea of the tie and dye of yarns in the Patan patola as a central idea is a series of contemporary artworks commissioned to London-based artist Akhila Krishnan, which was created between 2013 and 2014 by master patola weaver Govind Bhai in Patan. Here you can see how, using the tie and dye process, patterns are first created on yarns themselves before being put on a hand loom for weaving. And another form of resist dyeing practiced for centuries in India involves the patterning on textiles using a hand reed called kalam, in which patterns are hand painted by the artist not using dyes, but a form of resist such as wax. The fabric is then dyed, and with the wax melting, much like in batik, subsequently the pattern is revealed. A sophisticated tradition of textiles which uses this process is the Kodali Karupur, which combines such hand painting with resist, dyeing, and jamdani to create saris, as we see here in the 19th century, as well as other kinds of drapes for men for the Tanjore royal court. The art was lost to India for well over a century, until its revival in 2023 by the Chennai-based Aksh Studio of the panel that we see here, which recreates a 19th century Kodalikarupur saree's end panel or palla. This again shows us that not only do the visual themes endure in Indian textiles, but also complex materials, processes, and skills. And since the art of the kalam has come up, how can one not bring up the famed kalamkaris of the Deccan and South India? Conventionally, such kalamkari narrated scenes from mythology, and in this work created just over a decade back as a collaboration between French designer Berenice Elena and fourth generation kalamkari artist Sri Naranjan in Sri Kalahasti in Andhra Pradesh, the designer transforms the idea of kalamkari, which often depicts figural narrative scenes from myths, into a personal narrative as she narrates her travels through India over 30 years, encountering elements of Indian classical art, which she finds resonance with those from classical Greek art. And with that, I come to the concluding 4 slides and the textiles that we are going to be discussing. A rare chins, or if you'd like to call it kalamkari, made in the resist dye technique that I was talking about. So actually here what happens is, for those of you who are not familiar, the painting, like I said earlier, is not done with the dye, it's done with the resist. And then the fabric is dyed. So to achieve these number of shades requires that many applications and stages of hand patterning and dye, and then eventually returning to the base of white, which is also a very challenging process. So these kalamkaris and chintzes were called sarasa in Japan and Southeast Asia. They were exported to the Netherlands. They were exported to Britain and France, of course. Versions of them were exported to Thailand, Indonesia, very specific markets within Southeast Asia. And this particular textile represents a particular school of such kalamkaris or chins, which actually were produced for the Sri Lankan market. Just to enjoy a detail. So you, for instance, if you see these little white lines which detail the flower, they're actually done with a kind of discharge, or they're done with the resist itself. So this intricacy is quite, and nobody could master this in the world, and that's why Indians were called the master dyers of cloth. And with that, I come to a few textiles with which we conclude. One is a depiction of a garment, which actually which has patterned the name of Ram, the god Ram. So these kinds of textiles are called Namavali, where you have the repeated chants of often Ram on priest shawls, or of course in this case perhaps made for a royal court or aristocratic family, or perhaps for a wealthy mercantile elite, family, where you have these kinds of sacred chants which are embodied, in the textile. A very, very rare depiction I'm going to show you, and I'm sorry, is there a way to move the image further up, because we're missing. Yeah, I'm sorry that you can't see the end panel here, because it's a very rare depiction. It's a Namavali. It's a long ceremonial cloth made in Kashmir in Pashmina. And of course, we see Shaivite kind of references here. We can go back to it. We can just go back to it. Can we just go back to that last textile, please? We actually see in the end panel a very rare depiction of Shiv with Parvati. So these kinds of textiles, as you can see, his Trishul refuses to reveal himself, but these kinds of actual pictorial representations of Shiva are super rare. And here, because, typically Shiva is in the mountains, he doesn't wear cloth, he wears tiger skin. Vaishnavism is considered, more closely and associated with cloth, not so much Shaivism. And these particular kind of Shaivite Pashmina ceremonial textiles were created specifically for the Kashmiri Pandit community, who are Shaivites in Kashmir. With that, we move to other sacred textiles, these fragments with which I end the presentation out of samits and lampas. And these are very complex brocades which at one point were produced. There should be one more image. Which were produced. There's a lot of kind of scholarly debate around them. One school of scholars believes that they were produced in Gujarat. There's another school that suggests they were actually produced in northeast India, in what is the region that is North Bengal, Assam today. And we return, this is from the 14th century, 14th to 15th century, so the earliest textile that we have in the exhibition, but also among the great repertoire of textiles that have survived that we can actually physically study. So these samits and lampas, fragments like these were found in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. In the 80s, they started coming into the international auction world. And we can see again with these textiles how themes of birds and animals along with floral vegetal themes have kind of really coexisted. There is a final image. I'm really sorry for this back and forth, but and I thought it'd be really nice to end with another really, really important enduring theme in Indian textiles and art, which is that of the lotus. It is something that we find expressed in all kinds of art and architecture across the subcontinent, and we see a stylized version of what we call a frontal lotus, so from the top, not from the side. Again, these kinds of fragments of samits and lampas emerged, were used perhaps in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, but scholars have equally attributed them to Islamic courts, to their provenance and use in other Hindu courts, such as the Rajput realm, and so on and so forth. So just to give you a very brief overview over 500 years, from the 14th, 15th century to textiles that have been produced literally the last year for the exhibition itself, how sacred chants, the figurative, birds and animals, floral and vegetal themes, architectural themes like we saw in the Charbagh, and material themes such as tie and dye, indigo, and so on and so forth, continue to be received and continue to be reimagined by contemporary practitioners, showing us this very vast inheritance that has meaning and relevance even today. Thank you for listening. Again, sorry for some of these small glitches.
I think that was the most fascinating panel. It was crisp, and you, with your tapestry of textiles, kind of took us back so many centuries, but the influence of how it went into art, painting, architecture, and continues to do so today. It was fascinating. Thank you so much, Mayank.
Thank you so much for having me.
If there's any quick question, we could, because I have a minute. Otherwise, please do go ahead, buy the books which are available, and I'm sure Mayank would be happy to autograph them for you too.
No.
The way you presented
Yes.
is very fun, and your language and your pronunciation, it was extraordinary.
Well, thank you. I thought I was fumbling, but it's very kind of you.
In fact, I think always people attribute textiles to women's tastes. I saw a lot of men who were extremely interested. So you kept us awake, though it's through lunch.
Well, actually, most of the textiles that you saw here today were either possibly patronized, commissioned, or used by men. And those have survived because the women's textiles were possibly more in private spaces. So they're not even very, very well photographed or depicted. But well, so here we go.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.